Yeah, totally. And I'm so fascinated by how we kind of went from, we just had water really. Like that was the only there wasn't beverages available. We just had water. How do we go from that? How does beer arrive? Is it literally invented? Is it accidental? What's the story on that?
So yes, people would have obviously, hunter gatherer nomadic groups would have drunk water, and they would have looked for sources of fresh water. Um, but I think what probably happened with beer, I mean, we obviously don't know because it predates writing. So we think beer probably emerged sort of 10, 15,000 years ago. You can make beer without pottery. So what probably happened is you've killed an animal, you've stripped all the meat off it, you're roasting that, and then you take the stomach of the animal and you can use that as a essentially a cooking vessel, and you put water into it, and then you can throw other things into that vessel over a fire, and you can make soup. And so, they would have put whatever they had available into that soup. And if you put grains into that soup, so you make a sort of porridge, um, then if you left that overnight or for a couple of days and you came back to it, those grains would have naturally fermented. And somebody must have noticed this. They must have like come across a campsite that someone else had left, or they must have come back to a campsite and they would have found this porridge that was a few days old, and it would have been a bit fizzy, and it would have tasted a bit strange, a bit sour. But on the other hand, it would have had this wonderful sensation because it would have had alcohol in it. And this is because the
Yeah.
sugars in the grains have naturally fermented into alcohol. And so once people discovered this, they would have said, well, how can we make this happen, a bit more often? And we see this, there's evidence that some primates, so some, chimpanzees and so on, they will seek out fruits that they've gone off a bit, they've started to ferment, and there's alcohol. I mean, it turns out the alcoholic
Really?
content, yeah, right. So even if you eat a banana, a banana is about 0.5% alcohol by volume. So there's naturally small amounts of alcohol in fruit, and then if you let the fruit go off, it starts to ferment. And if you try and store grapes, then it starts to, the grape juice starts to ferment. So, but anyway, what would have happened with these grain sort of porridges is people would have said, well, how can we make this happen? And they would have realized that you make a soup and you leave it for a couple of days, and then it starts to ferment. And if you put some fruit in there as well, then you're providing more sugar to ferment into alcohol, and that makes it stronger. So at some point, people figured this out. And one of the things I say in the book is that there's this theory that the reason why people settled down and they switched from being nomadic hunter-gatherer bands that moved around to being farmers who were settled in one place and were reliant in particular on grain crops, so wheat and barley and rye and things like that, is that those are the crops you can make into beer. So if you start to associate beer, if you, in particular, if you start to give it religious significance, if you start to use it in rituals and you need to maintain the supply of beer, then you need to maintain the supply of those grain crops. And that would give you a reason to settle down and adopt agriculture. So obviously we can't be sure that this is the case. But what we can do is we can look around the world and we can say that whichever continent you look on, 10,000 years ago, people are taking grain crops, whether it's corn in the Americas, whether it's wheat and barley in Eurasia, whether it's rice in East Asia. They are taking these grain crops and making them into beer. Or it's actually millet as well in China. So seems to be a universal thing. I can't remember, is it sorghum in Africa? But wherever you look, people are making grain crops into beer. So that seems to be a universal thing, and that would give you an incentive to settle down and start to be a settled rather than nomadic. And some people have said that was the biggest mistake in history, switching from being nomadic to being settled, because in many other ways, it's much worse lifestyle to be settled in one place. You have a lower diversity of your diet, and and so on. But one of the things it does is it guarantees the supply of beer. So this is the beer theory of civilization, and we're never going to be able to check whether it's right or wrong, but I think it's pretty plausible. I was a big fan of beer myself. If it's like, well, you could be a nomad and wander around and have no beer, or you could be settled in one place and you can have beer whenever you like it, then I'm going to take the beer. So Yeah, so beer isn't so much it's not so much invented as discovered, and once people discover how to make it, then they kind of pursue that. And then by the Egyptian period, we know the Egyptians had 15 or so different recipes for different kinds of beer, and they would put different things in the beers. They'd put dates
Whoa.
in a beer to make it stronger. They would have, the children drank beer, so you'd send your children to school with beer, but that would be very weak beer, what we would call table beer or small beer. So there was this whole spectrum of beers, and that's evolved by about sort of 4,000 years ago. So yeah, it's absolutely central to the first civilizations that we see emerging in Mesopotamia and Egypt. The main drink is beer, and it's a currency. It's the default drink, and so I think that really does that does support the idea that beer played this pivotal role in switching people from being nomadic to being settled.
Hey, thanks for watching this video. This is my dog, Murphy, and these are dog treats. Now I'll give Murphy one of these dog treats, and all you have to do is press the like button. Just press that little like button right down there at the bottom of this video, and this sweet, adorable, cute little puppy gets a treat. All thanks to you. Alright, you did it? Okay, I believe you if you said you did it. There you go, Murph. She got that treat because of you. Now, I'll eat one of these treats. And all you have to do is click that subscribe button right there, pointing to it. Just click that subscribe button, subscribe to Curiosityness with me, Travis DeRose. Get lots of good video, and I'll eat this treat. All right, you did that too? That's not very good. Bro, not very good.